All right, thanks everybody for joining us for December 3rd special City Council meeting where we're going to be talking about financial services for water, sewer, and solid waste. I do want to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the land on which we gather and Zoom is the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. I also just want to recognize we had a little bit of a technical challenge this morning, and so we're just working through that. So hopefully everything is tickety-boo now. And with that, I will hear a motion to receive the Water Fund Financial Report.
May we proceed?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Council, we have a presentation starting with our water fund. Ms. Berard, our financial planning manager, and Mr. Kyle Shaw, Mr. Chris Davidson, and Ms. Jennifer Nelson are going to participate in the overview of this presentation. For those people that are consuming our meeting online, the presentation is going to give a budget overview for each service area, operational expenditures, budget variances, an overview of capital projects, and some of the issues that are driving our changes, as well as surplus and reserves. We'll have staff walk through this presentation and answer questions at the end if that works for Council. Thank you very much. Ms. Burr?
I'll just share my screen now.
Go to slideshow.
Is she a co-host? Is
All right. Well, thank you for being here this morning to go over the water, sewer, and solid waste budget and user fees. So first, I'd like also to thank Carl Sawkins, our financial analyst that's been helping a lot with all the budget, the reports, and the presentation. So a lot of work went into that, and she's been very resourceful along with the public works team. So jumping now into the water and sewer financial plan overview. Those two funds are self-funded utilities and are not assisted with funding from general taxation. There's two major sources of revenue: the utility fees to cover the operational expenses and the frontage taxes to cover capital expenses. City utility fees are impacted by mostly the CBRD capital projects and all the permits and regulatory requirements for city operations. The financial plans are developed based on asset management with the emphasis on preventative maintenance to extend the life of city assets. So the water sewer financial plan is a collaborative effort involving public works, engineering, and finance to be in compliance with the community charter that requires municipality to have a 5-year financial plan adopted every year before May 15th. So today we are now seeking approval of the proposed financial plan and utility fees, and the next step will be to amend the fees and charges with a proposed rate for 2022. It's the wrong slide. View that's coming up.
Nope.
Oh, it's still not?
No.
It's not on?
Well, what's coming up is the presenter's view with the notes and stuff.
Oh, sure.
But
I have the PowerPoint here.
thanks, Annie. You're back in business.
All right.
Like we got yesterday.
yeah, she did.
Oh, sorry, guys.
All right. Now, these slides, again, we've seen that before. These slides provide a visual reference of the city responsibility versus the homeowner responsibility in regards to the water and sewer infrastructures. So now, looking at our first fund, the water fund is, well, again, the original, sorry, just from the slide. Here you go. So regional and municipal components all play a role in providing water service to the resident. The CBRD has planned capital upgrades and expansion, including the new water treatment facility, and that results in higher bulk water rates. On the other side, we have the city that operates and maintains a Class 3 water distribution system. Now briefly, the overview of the operating expenses budget. So we are facing an increase of $360,000, roughly 5% from the 2021 to 2022 budget. Most of the increases are related to a few key drivers here. So an increase of $100,000 to the meter replacement program, and that is funded by the water meter replacement reserve. There's also now a portion of the asset management team that is allocated to the water and user fund. And that team was previously all allocated to the public works administrative team. That represents $62,000. And there's also a general increase to the in the cost allocated from the general government services and the public works expenses for $125,000. And that's mostly related to the CPI on salaries and wages of the support team. It also includes some of the strategic initiative, the costs that were captured in the general government services, like all the communication, IT support team. And then the water bulk purchase increases by $44,000 this year. And I put the rates there, the bulk water rate that increases every year. There's been a slight decrease in 2021 because CBRD has revised the bulk water rate from 83 cents down to 80 cents per cubic meter due to the pandemic. And now the detailed summary of the expenses. So again, just to point out the first line, water admin training. So we see the increase from the asset management team, but also the CPI increase on all the water crew. The water meter increasing by $100,000, again funded by reserve, so no impact on the bottom line. The water conservation program is decreasing by $95,000 this year, and that's mostly due because of the combination of the leak detection and repair program with the SMART initiative capital program. So the money was moved from the operating to the capital program, and also the completion of the park irrigation leak detection program in 2021. Water purchase, again, our most significant expense on the water operating budget, and interfund allocation increasing by $125,000. And here's just a visual of our operating budget. Again, just want to point out the water purchase from CBRD representing about 58% of our budget. And the changes on the right side, just about $360,000, 5%, most of it due to the contractual and CPI increases. And now I'll pass it along to Todd to go over the major increases.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Berard. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the finance team and the public works team for their collaboration and efforts to bring forward this budget to council. And I'll go over some of the service impacts relative to the budget that will be impacting or for consideration this year for council. First and foremost, Ms. Berard spoke to the increased replacement funding for water meters, and that is a result of assets nearing the end of useful life for the ICI customers, the 2 and 3 inch meters. There is currently an operational program year over year. And this is an increase to that is directly funded through the reserve. Some minor increases in service levels relative to SCADA systems. We've since the onset of since the integration of the sandwich collection system, there's a number of additional appurtenances and PRVs within the system that require monitoring and automation. That's for that. And then servicing agreements with our partners at KIP and IR2, we're working on bringing some finality to that. Finally, the CBRD requisition increase of 44,000, the allocations, contractual and CPI increases. That's what I already spoke of. Moving on to the next slide here, water operations. Frankly, our duty here as a purveyor of water to our residents is to safeguard public health. And in doing so, we're required to follow provincial and federal regulations administered by the local health authority. The city does own and operate a Class 3 water distribution system. That is a slight change from what has been previously presented to council. Previously, it was a Class 4 facility. Since the onset and the water treatment plant, the complexity of the system has now dropped, and reclassification through the OECP guidelines has dropped our classification to 3. Still quite substantial, and the requirements are still high. And our mandate to operate a unidirectional flushing program, continuing our leak detection and leak loss prevention, cross-connection control, which is the security of the water system for our customers, water quality testing, which is weekly and also annually, and then required staff education and certification. Water assets, it's really a snapshot of water assets, and I think this slide is fairly repetitive year over year, but I think it's a good snapshot of the total assets that the city owns and is required to operate on an annual basis. And I've added a bit of a slide there just to show the inherited increases through development services year over year, and you'll see a little bit of a lull in inherited increases through 2020 and 2021, which could be directly related to the pandemic, but on average, I think the storyline here is about 1.5% increase year over year in total inherited assets. Touching on this Watersmart Action Plan, so those recommendations for the Watersmart Action Plan will be incorporated in the 2022 and 2026 financial plan. And some of the big cost drivers for those, and maybe an overview of what's been accomplished to date. Here is the transmission distribution district zone metering, and he noted that some of the operational funds have been moved over into capital. As a result of hard work of staff, they've been able to combine much of the deliverables within the program to provide a more cost-effective and economical delivery of that overall service, which is inclusive of our cross-connection control or some of our looping within our distribution system that has been pre-identified through our analytics, as well as source control, which is that difference between distribution and transmission and the accountability of water consumption for our municipality, as well the development of district zone meters, which is really the first step into understanding where our water is going and what our users are doing with it. In addition to that, one of the action items that was identified in the Watersmart Action Plan was new development irrigation requirements, and so we've been working with an engineering firm in the mainland to understand what that implication may be in its current in draft form over the course of the last year, developing what those irrigation requirements may look like, and that will be council's future consideration. Working again with our finance team through the water and sewer rate review, which is underway, and we're hoping to see the finality of that in 2022. Spoke briefly about the water detection survey. And that was an operational bump over the last 3 years, 2019, 2020, and 2021, where we had contracted out leak detection survey across the entire water distribution network. That work is now complete. The survey results are in. Not a significant amount of identified loss, but reasonable in terms of output for that particular program. In addition to that, it set a baseline for acoustic knowledge for our system, so we understand how our system reacts under certain flows and criteria, and it has informed our staff to be able to put forth a repetitive operational program to compound on the information that was collected through that survey. And in 2022, we'll be looking at the pressure zone 120, which is in the Valley Blue area. So additional measures that we've taken through our own conservation strategy with the Parks Group is the Splash Park. You'll know that the Splash Park had seen a bit of a resurfacing this year, and through those works, we were able to put some orifice restrictions in and reduce the pressure to see an overall net gain of conservation or reduction by between 25 and 30% of our annual usage within that facility, but still providing an amenity that's enjoyable by many. The operational bump again was the irrigation controller. So that irrigation controller program is now complete. The works were completed within 2021, so the realization of those cost savings will likely be seen in 2022. And then minor operational changes, irrigation strategies, drought-tolerant planting, and irrigation zone balancing through the operational season have seen significant gains in terms of our conservation efforts. Moving on to capital projects. Again, I spoke to the Watersmart Initiatives program, so that's a culmination now of not only the cross-connect control, but the looping and the source control into one cohesive program that speaks unitedly to a strategic effort to understanding how we're going to protect our system and set the stage for future knowledge relative to our consumption and accountability to where our water is going. The water South Courtney secondary transmission is a collaborative project with the CBRD, working on providing transmission servicing to South Courtney. This funding allotment is for the city's apportionment of detailed design for that project, which is likely to see groundbreak in 2023 or 2024. That's our partnership funding allotment. Sandwick area fire flow upgrade of $120,000. So last year in 2021, you would have seen a budget recommendation for fire flow analysis. So since 2020, we've taken in the Sandwick water system. The incorporation of that system has now required us to do some investigations relative to fire flow to meet the standards that are required as such. And out of those works, there's been a number of capital projects that have identified to bring it to today's standards. And that's what that budgetary line item is. A carry forward from 2021 into 2022 is half or 50,000 of the 100,000 that's allocated towards the Highway 19 loop in Christie Park. And again, that is fire flow for a light industrial zone. So increase in capacity for that particular area. And then finally, the Braidwood Road utility design is the water component. So Braidwood is a project that engineering is working on, and this is simply just the water component contribution to that overall design. I'll pass it back to Anne.
And just to touch base on the water capital projects, I just want to mention that the 5-year plan detail is included in the agenda on page 14. And this is the picture as of now, but any capital carry forward amount will be adjusted if needed before we finalize the consolidated financial plan with no impact to the bottom. And now jumping on the revenue requirements for water. So staff recommend a 2% increase to the water user fees and no change to the frontage fee. The remaining revenue requirements will be coming from the realized and anticipated growth. And the impact for a residential, single residential home is about $10. Just want to point out again that of the $516 for the water fee, 47% of that is going towards the water purchase from CBRD. And the water master plan and water rate review to be completed next year will inform the water revenue requirement for the future years. And now an overview of the transfers, contribution, and surpluses. So transfer to the water capital project for 2022 is just over $500,000. Contribution to the reserve, water reserve, are fairly stable. The only change this year is the carbon tax to the greenhouse gas reserve. That program has been discontinued, so we don't have that transfer anymore. And we are anticipated generating a surplus of $86,000 this year. And again, if you want to see the estimated balance for the 5 years, it's available in the agenda on page 15. All right. And here's the estimated balance for 2021 and 2022. So for the water and sewer, staff recommend maintaining a minimum of about 2 months of operating expenses in the surpluses, which is about $1.3 million for the water fund. So we're sitting in a pretty healthy surplus right now at just under $4 million expected by the end of 2022. And on the reserve side, everything is pretty stable with contribution and funding about equal to from 1 year to another. So no major change. Again, the detail on page 15 of the agenda for the 5-year. So that concludes for the water fund. So we're open to questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, and thanks for your patience today. And you did absolutely fantastic given the start that we had. So just want to acknowledge how that can mess with your mind. So I really want to appreciate you making it through. You, Kyle, as well. And with that, we do have a few questions that have come forward. And first one will be from Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. 4 questions. Maybe I'll start with the inherited water assets that you outlined. Would that include like pipes in the roads and all that stuff in new subdivisions? Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and I wonder if you've contemplated that we haven't really taken on a lot of new subdivisions in the last few years, if that might be affecting it. I know a lot of we're doing a lot of multifamily, and if there are less assets to inherit in multifamily versus subdivisions.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Infill development has less impact in inherited assets. However, the complexity of the assets required to service multifamily do increase, and they also increase operational demand relative to flows, both out and into those systems.
Yeah, not to mention there's lots of old infrastructure to be upgraded, right, when we do infill, but thanks for that. The asset management fund, it looks healthy. It was, I don't know, 1.5 million or something. What exactly is that money for? Is that like future upgrades for capital, or is that, can you explain that a little better? I know we have a lot of asset management funds and how that differs from other reserves we might have.
Yes, I can take that question. So the asset management reserve, I think, was created a few years ago, and it was not restricted to any specific type of assets, so it can be used towards any capital infrastructure renewal or investment.
Okay, and sorry, did you mention like a goal we're looking for, or a cap on that one?
I think it was just to create that fund available to use, and eventually, again, whenever we have those master plan ready, I think that fund's going to be used to kind of.
It'll be clarified.
Yeah.
Great. Is it okay to keep going? I got 2 more.
Actually,
you want me to hold off?
no, Mr. Garbett was just going to make a comment as well.
Through the mayor, thank you very much, Councillor Frisch. Ms. Berard referenced our master plans, and so the water and sewer master plans are in their final draft forms. They're working through staff at this point. That will have a dramatic impact on our asset management program going forward in the financial planning in more detail, specific to those assets and extending their life or maintenance, level of service discussions. It's really the launching point to fully flesh out and implement our big picture asset management planning. And so that would basically be the case across all of our assets, and that will roll out in over the next few years in more detail. It's going to build on all the work that's been done in the past, and so it'll be a similar process that we've had, but I think there'll be some more detail on exactly what assets and how they're being managed.
Sounds great, thanks. The next question I had was about the Water Smart Action Plan, and I noticed that we actually decreased this year or for next year our expenses, and I'm really happy to see that work being done. I'm just wondering what sort of the long-term expectation is for that, for the cost, the expense of that. So do we see it holding steady around there, or is it going to go up and down every year depending on what we think we can manage?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I would say that it will be a fluid number relative to the project deliveries that are at hand. A lot of the pre-work, a lot of the work that was done out of the initial presentation of the Water Smart Action Plan was acquisition of knowledge and data relative to the recommendations, and so that occurred in the course of 2020 and 2021. And we're seeing an increase in capital expenditure relative to 2022 for the implementation of some of those physical assets. But in consultation with the operational groups, who will likely see recommendations come forward and results of leak detection programs and the recommendations that come out of those, and then further analysis and efficiencies that will be found within our overall operations.
Okay, thanks. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on the bulk water rate coming out of the RD. I know we, you decreased it. I think I was on the board at that point for reasons to save money during COVID. Kind of held off a lot of the increases. So in 2023, I think we'll be looking at a fair hike. And I wonder if any contemplation was given to maybe socking away a bit of money every year, because I sense that, you know, not everyone's in great financial shape, but we've kind of weathered the majority of that storm. And so, yeah, is there any thoughts to putting a little bit of way to soften that blow when that shows up in 2023?
Through the mayor and Councillor Frisch, Ms. Nelson will speak to that.
Yes, thank you for the, can you hear me? Through the CAO to mayor and council. So we actually maintained the original planned bulk water rates within our financial plan. We didn't recognize the drop for that reason, so that we could make sure that we were covering ourselves when that increase comes along. And so that's really where you see we've incorporated those increases to the bulk water rate in those future years, and we're really watching that surplus balance to ensure that we're keeping a nice cushion in there, a safe cushion to be able to absorb any of those future costs. So we have taken that into consideration. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks.
Through the mayor to council, I just really want to acknowledge the good financial planning that's been happening in the utilization of these utility rates. Because we have we share the cost between our own operations and the regional district. I think it's been very good hindsight to try and use that to smooth out those things. The majority of those costs we need to, we have one shared taxpayer in that regard. And so we had in preparing for this presentation, we had exactly those questions on what the long-term financial impacts are on our taxpayers. And because of the good and prudent previous planning, we're going to be able to do that. And if we don't do that, and we don't keep healthy reserves, we can be seriously impacted by those bumps. And we may feel this in other capital intensive areas that are covered by this utility focus in water, sewer, solid waste in the long term. So thanks for that.
Excellent. Next we have Councillor Theos.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate the presentation also. A couple questions. One is, if I may, one is in regards to the $100,000 for the water metering increase, and in that regard, with the fact that the commercial and multi-residential uses have the water meter replacement within their budgets, and that's why it's coming out of the reserve. My question is in regards to if the money is for that $100,000 is coming out of the reserve that it's been paid for by the users, I would suppose, over the years, why would that be an increase to the budget if it's already sitting there waiting to be used?
That's an excellent question. Actually, it's not an increase to the bottom line, but here we were just looking at the expense side of things, so we didn't see the offset on the revenue side. But we have that $100,000 come in as a transfer from this. So the bottom line is more than that. But if you look only to the expense side, you have that increase showing.
Okay, so that wouldn't be an increase to the everyday users then, because it's in the reserves. Okay, great. That's just what I wanted to clarify. Thank you so much. And the secondary question I have, if I may please, is in regards to, we talked about the surpluses, and we just touched on it with our financial director. And the fact that we're just a little bit over 3 times roughly what we think is the minimum of which we should be carrying at 1.3 million roughly. When does it get to the point where we feel satisfied that we do have a good solid amount of reserves and maybe some of those savings can be seen for our citizens moving forward? Is there a number in mind?
We don't really have a number in mind at this point. Again, we were waiting to have the master plans completed and the solid waste, the water rates review completed as well, to define what kind of contribution we needed to make to reserve. And also, I mean, having a comfortable level of surplus in the future that kind of help us reducing or maintaining lower user fee increases. So for the water, for instance, I think we maintain 2% across the 5-year financial plan because we know we can drop it from surface every year. And I think Jennifer wants to add a little more.
Thank you, Annie.
Sure, thank you, Annie. I just thought I'd add to that. Annie spoke about the master plans, but there's also the user rate review that's going to take place, and that's really going to guide us in terms of setting financial policy, which is also a strategic priority of councils. And those policies will identify the approved high and low ends of reserves in our surpluses. And really that 2 months of operating recommended minimum balance in the surplus is a real minimum, and optimal is 4 months. So really you're at an optimal state right now, and that's a good thing. And if you look to the 5-year plan of the surplus projections, we do start using some of that. So you can see it's being utilized towards capital funding throughout and trying to maintain at least that minimum balance. But really once those master plans come together and we're really refining that capital program is when we'll be able to really define what those numbers are going to look like as we move forward.
So what of them is missing? And the optimal was kind of part of the question.
Yeah,
that I was
and
hoping to know,
optimal
so.
and minimum, and maybe just to add on that, as we recall, when one of the reasons we want to keep that surplus is that is the cash that we can use to continue operations if we run into trouble with collections of revenue, as we saw in COVID when there was that risk of not collecting our revenues. We had to basically survive and keep the utility running on the surplus at that time. So just to add that, thank you.
Some fantastic answers from both of you, and obviously having a surplus in when we do have major infrastructure work, rather than having to take out loans where we're paying interest, some of that surplus can go to offset that. So I really appreciate the answers. Thank you very kindly.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Theos. And I think really it highlights, especially this year when you see these extreme weather events that are impacting communities on top of COVID, when Ms. Nelson talks about minimum and recommended and those kinds of things, making sure that we're really placed well is going to be absolutely critical going into the future. As we may have projects that we may not even anticipate coming forward due to extreme weather events. So with that, Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Bob.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Well, I think we've exhausted the surplus conversation. That was what I was going to talk about, because of course, often the public will see, we've got all these reserves and you're raising my rate and what's going on. So I really appreciated those explanations. And I know that during COVID, there were some municipalities who were really, were not in the position that we were in terms of having enough money. So I appreciate the financial management that our team here has been able to do to keep us out of trouble. Excuse me. Sorry. And regarding the Watersmart Action Plan, first of all, great strategies around, I guess this is more to Mr. Shaw, around reducing consumption. The splash park's a great example. I've always thought that some of those little kids were going to get blown halfway across the street from the pressure of that water. So I saw some, I think that the water pressure was due to be reduced there. So I think that's just a really great practical way, though, to start saving money. And I'll just ask about the conservation efforts, and there's many that have been outlined in terms of, and also kind of doing audits of how we can further work on that. I guess I'm wondering, those are helping reduce our costs, but when do we see those reduced costs, such as the reduced consumption of the splash park and all these other things, starting to really start to offset the, those savings really offsetting the costs, so that we start to see a real difference there? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great question, great point. I appreciate the commentary on the splash park. I equally agree that it was probably a bit high in terms of pressure, so. Still fun though, which is good. And yeah, Watersport Action Plan conservation as a whole is really about a balance of implementation and then reflection. And understanding that implementation or whatever strategy or plan that we have done internally within our own systems has seen reality. And really, that was really the major focus of 2021. There was a substantial amount, as Mr. alluded to, capital or operational expense that occurred over the course of 2020 and 2021, and now we're in the reflection stage of that as we plan for future capital installation, and those realizations should come full circle. I appreciate your commentary in terms of cost savings within our overall expenditure in terms of water allocations, and the splash park would be further defined within the Parks and Rec consumption budget.
Sorry, can I have one more? Just in terms of the irrigation requirements, that's another comment. I'm just bringing up some things that I know the public often makes comments about in terms of irrigation, and often we'll get calls about, things that are being watered and it's raining out or whatever. Are some of these, is that part of the irrigation, I guess, analysis that's going on under that plan?
Yeah, thank you for that. Great question. And that's exactly it. As before we embark on having discussions and speaking with the public in terms of their overall conservation strategies, we first want to look at ourselves. And part of that capital expenditure or operational increase expenditure within the 2021 budget was for the smart controllers for our own irrigation systems, bringing up the city's irrigation to a standard of which it can react within those environmental windows or changes, so that we're not watering in the middle of rain. And that we're strategic in our approach in terms of our overall usage for ourselves.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Morin. And next we have Councillor McCullough.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks everyone for the presentation. Yeah, just a general comment about the rate increase that we're looking at of 2%. I think that that's really positive given just the improvements that we've seen in our water system over the last couple of years, where our residents are receiving a much better quality of water coming out of their tap than they did a few years ago, and we're no longer looking at boil water advisories despite the extremely wet weather we've had recently. So I think that deserves some highlighting, that we're looking at a rate increase that's most likely lower than the inflationary rate that we've seen over the last year, and yet we've received a higher level of service at the same time. I have a couple of questions just around the difference in our connections for metered versus non-metered, and just some of the differences there. I guess my first question is, during our previous budget, which was heavily impacted by the pandemic, we saw an unusually high reduction in water consumption, which I think was probably attributable to less industrial and commercial water use, and which of course is our meter connections. And I'm curious to know if our increase this year is also mostly from our metered users, or if the increase was fairly consistent across both types of water users.
Yes, thank you for that. Total consumption, volume consumption for the city is calculated at a bulk rate from the CBRE perspective, and then proportionally from an ICI perspective. We respectively have about 70% of our total ICI customer group on a metered format, and the initial reduction within our operational consumption through the onset of COVID was a direct result of ICI, and that has been a slow merge in terms of establishing back to today's standard, and it's likely to plateau and level out to what we would normally see in terms of both ICI consumptions as residential, as well as residential consumption will level as individuals return to what's possible.
Thanks for that. And then I just wanted to understand as well, the 2% increase, is it basically applied to what metered customers pay for their water rate versus the residential rate, or is the breakdown slightly different?
I can respond to that. So, yeah, the 2% increase is applied to all the rates, basically, across the board. So the flat rate for residential and also all the meters, all the meter rental and metered water as well.
Okay, great. And then just one final question, also around the metering. The line item for water meter replacement, is that like regular replacement of aging assets, or is that also including adding new metered connections to our ICI? Is that both?
Yeah, that's correct. That's both. That's the replacement of existing in-service assets that are at or near end of life. The old style water meters that are currently in service are not as efficient as they age, and replacing them will provide generate revenue in turn. And then additionally, the ongoing operational program that we have on a per annual basis is for the installation thereof of net new to bring us up to 100% capacity in terms of our ICI customers.
And just to follow up on that, so we basically have about a 30% of our ICI customers are currently not metered. And do we have like a timeline of when we expect to reach that goal?
A definitive timeline would be difficult to say at this point. We have been strategic in our approach thus far by going after high consumption user groups in order to effectively obtain the most revenue per capita installation cost. Much of our ICI customers are small business type customers as well, so they do fall into the category, but their overall consumption is very minor in nature, and so that's our strategic focus thus far, and this will again aid in that movement.
Very logical. Thanks for answering the questions.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum, and I think you did bring up quite a few good points there, and one of them being the economic impact of the boil waters that we were suffering from for quite some time, and the impact those had on restaurants. And again, if you try to compound that with COVID and extreme weather events, I think we're really sitting in a good position now. So thanks for bringing that up. Next, we have Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I was thinking much the same thing as you about the level of service increase, and Councillor McCollum, not having boil water advisories, but given what's happened over the last few weeks with the rainfall that we've had. I think in any previous year, we would all be boiling our water, and the impact on businesses, particularly on restaurants, is considerable. I wanted to ask a question about the water operating expenses for sort of the largest kind of increase there would be the administration and training, and that seems to be largely due to a reallocation of the asset management team's resources to the water service. And I was curious, is that a result of the creation of the master plan that more services were required? Because it's sort of it's about a 35% increase, and I was wondering, is that something which we might see further increases in future years, or is that kind of that reallocation of resources, is that kind of a one-off financial cost?
Mr. Garber, did you want to?
Yeah, through the mayor to council, thank you for that question. It's a process that we're looking at to sort of allocate the utilization of those staff and the effect that they have within that. It's very common to look at utilities to support that. I just want to jump in the big picture in terms of that transition, and Ms. Bird can speak to it, but generally it's good practice because of the role those folks are relative to this utility consumption, that it be allocated that way. I mean, ultimately it's our operations of our organization, but the specific work that they do support the utilization or the utility itself and how it's managed and how it grows and how the assets are managed as well.
Can I ask briefly, so was it the case previously the asset management was not, team was not attributed to any particular function? It was its own budget item, and now it's being sort of allocated to different services?
Through the mayor to Councillor Cole Hamilton, that we spoke to that in the presentation a little bit about that transition, but you're right, it was inside the public works services generally, and senior staff can correct me on that if there's anything to add.
Yes, I can jump in here. So before I think there's 4 employees working in the asset management group. The manager was actually already allocated to the different funds, but the 3 employees working with him were not. So we just kind of streamlined the asset management team to be all allocated the same way, similar to the engineering team that is already also allocated to the different funds. So we just kind of made it equal for all the support teams there.
Okay, great. Thanks for that additional detail. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, and Councillor Hilling.
Thank you, Mayor. We recently had correspondence from a citizen who had moved here from elsewhere and was surprised to find that we didn't have water metering universally, as they do in many communities, and suggested that we were never going to meet our water conservation targets unless we implemented them. I'm just wondering what we have to say to the community. Do we have any plans to let people know where we stand in relation to meeting our goals of water conservation, and whether staff have any views on how realistic those prospects are under the current system?
Mr. Garber?
And through the mayor, Councillor Hillian, thank you for that. The issue of universal water meters has been a long one through this community. Interestingly enough, when you look across British Columbia, there's varying levels of metering there. It's very interesting. It's somewhat different than other provinces in British Columbia. Generally, though, I think we have some direction that we're following in the big picture, but I think the staff can speak to some of the trends and maybe where we're going in the future.
That's great. Thank you for that. Great question. And really recapping on some of the highlights of the Watersport Action Plan, water metering, universal metering was identified within the overall strategy. However, it was defined that it wouldn't be a singular source to resolve relative to meeting our overall goals, and that it plays a role, but it isn't going to be a one-stop shop relative to conservation, because metering or usage or consumption within a private setting is in fact a choice, although it does often come with a financial piece. But both from an operational perspective as the city, we need to look at the water consumption and the use that we do globally as a whole to ensure that we are being the most effective in terms of our overall consumption and our projected conservations. And we're looking at meaningful strategies. For instance, one of the ones that's highlighted within the Watersport Action Plan is irrigation control strategies, whereby we inhibit the irrigable space in which a resident would have within their needs. At any one home, and that could be done through greenfield development or new development applications through bylaw amendments in the future. But it's about those larger pictures and looking outside the box, refining what it is we do on an operational basis so that we are doing our best, as we are one of the larger consumers of overall consumption, and then understanding the need from the community from a business impact perspective, but also extending that expectation from our residents relative to conservation measures. And one of the good ones that comes to mind is the CDRD has a program for smart irrigation controllers, in which that is a rebate of $300 per controller per residential household, which would act in much the same way that we have done now with our operations in our park setting, where we take into consideration weather and forecast and provide opportunities for conservation.
Thanks. I think that some people who take this very seriously see their neighbors watering their driveways and paying basically the same rates, and I think that's where the concern comes from. But I know that this is primarily something the regional district does in relation to the water system. I'm just wondering if we as a city have any plans to do any type of report card in relation to how our citizens are doing with water conservation in general.
It's a great question, and you're right. The outward look as to where water consumption is occurring and at what rates and during what peak flows and demands. And part of the Watersmart Action Plan, district zone metering comes to a highlight of that. Currently, with the transmission distribution system interconnectivity, it becomes difficult to understand where the total consumption is relative to per capita consumption versus our light industrial or commercial settings. And the district zone meter will be able to provide opportunities for the city to understand where consumption is in a residential format and which areas would be most effective in terms of implementation strategies forward.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Councillor Hillian and Councillor Frisch.
Just realizing we're on receipt, I was gonna offer to move the motion, but maybe you want to speak to it as well.
I've kind of been making my comments as we go along. I think it's been a pretty fruitful conversation. I don't see any further questions or comments waiting. So if you'd like to move the motion, I think that's good.
Okay, sure. I'm happy to move that council approve the proposed 2022 to 2026 water fund financial plan, and that the water user fee be increased by 2% for 2022.
Second.
All right. Are there any questions or comments regarding the motion? I know we've just had a fulsome discussion, but
Did we dispense with receipt?
oh, my apologies. Yeah, I'll dispense with the receipt as unanimously received. My apologies for not doing that ahead of time, and then Councillor Frisch's subsequent motion. Thanks for that point of order, Councillor Hillian, and Councillor Theos.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to touch back on the last point, because I do recall a letter that came in, and that letter was referring to commercial business, that a large commercial business that was watering possibly on a rainy day, such as what Kyle's been referring to, is that we have a system in place now that can monitor whether it's raining and whatnot, and whether the sprinkler should go on or not. Now, my question is, from what I've seen, is the public, or general public, to the most part, maybe 99% or 98%, are doing an excellent job of doing their part in conservation. But do we have something in place where we can have these larger businesses that are watering on rainy days make the same adjustments that we're making to have these systems in place?
Mr. Garvin?
Yeah, Mr. Shaw can speak to that. I would point out, it was referenced in the presentation, but there are incentives available through the CVRD for residents and to gain access to some of those things. Now, part of the big picture in water use is to try and do some more education, which is part of our Watersmart program. Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Garbutt. To the CAO, to Mayor and Council, great question, thank you for that. And really, Mr. Garbutt touched on the point that I was going to go to in terms of our ambassador program. In 2018 and 2019 is when the ambassador program first struck out with our community in terms of conservation efforts and education and outreach. We saw a lax in that in 2020 and 2021 through COVID, and we're hoping through 2022 to revitalize that program and bring it back to its fulsome sense. And that really is the driver. It's education, it's outreach, it's continuous communication with those businesses, inclusive of the residential community, to inform them of good conservation strategy and expectations in terms of water usage. And really, we've seen a vast amount of gains relative to receipt of that information with that particular group, and that's the focus of them through the summer months.
Thanks, Kyle. That really helps.
Okay. All right, thanks, Councillor Theos. Councillor Moore.
Can I just have a quick comment? I mean, I think also commercial folks have water meters, and being a commercial building owner until recently, it only takes one leaky toilet in your commercial space and a water bill that is like 10 times more than what you normally pay to get you really being careful about that. So I think in terms of commercial businesses, certainly we see that maybe some are, wasting water, but they are also paying for it and are probably trying to be as careful as possible. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Councillor Moore. I don't see any further questions or comments at this point, so I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Excellent. And next we have the sewer fund financial report.
Might I request a 2-minute break just to stretch, or is that premature for everyone? You guys want a motor, or I could use a stretch and bathroom break, but
That's good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, all right. We'll break for 2 minutes.
Thanks,
or
Mayor.
so,
I appreciate it.
Oh,
I'll
great.
run.
Okay. So, thanks everybody for joining back with us. Next on our agenda is a sewer fund financial report, and I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll use the same format to walk through our sewer fund. Ms. Brard.
So now sewer fund. So again, similar to the water fund, the regional and municipal component play a vital role again in providing the service to the resident. The regional infrastructure includes the pumping stations, sewer force mains, wastewater treatment plant, and the city of Courtney Class 3 sewer collection infrastructure includes the lift stations, sewer trunk mains, collection system, and connections within our government. And here's the overview of the key drivers of the operating expenses budget, which increased by just over $500,000 or 8% from 2021 to 2022 budget, mostly due to the CBRD regional sewer requisition, plus just over $250,000. And the sewer requisition represents just about 70% of our operating expenses. And similar to what we've discussed previously for water, there's now a portion of the asset management team now allocated to the sewer fund. And we also see that similar increase from general government services and public works expenses for just over $100,000 for the sewer fund. And here's the detailed operating expense budget. So again, similar to water, the sewer admin and training is going up mostly from the asset management team, but also to account for the CPI of the sewer group. The other big driver is the CBRD requisition, plus $277,000, and the interfund allocation for $100,000. And the visual here, again, just want to draw your attention on the big blue section here for the sewer requisition, 69% of our total operating expenses. And budget changes for 2021, $525,000, again, mostly related to contractual and CPI increase. And now I'll turn it over to Todd to go over the increases and operations of sewer fund.
Thank you, Ms. Brewer. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So just to highlight some of the changes, although minor on the operational end, you'll see a slight increase in manhole chambers and inspections. And that's really just directly in response to WorkSafe BC requirement change in terms of run elevation to first rung. And so there's some additional works and services are required to bring those items up to standard. And Ms. Berard spoke directly to the contractual and CPI increases, both the CBRD requisition, the internal fund allocation, and then contractual for staff. Fairly basic in terms of increases there. And I will highlight staff are very respectful of the operations and the cost incurred relative to operations, and we continue to drive ourselves to find efficiencies within the service delivery model that we provide our residents, and that those increases are a direct reflection of that hard work. As to the sewer operations, or the wastewater, as it's referenced within the Environmental Management Act as a municipal wastewater regulation, and under these regulations, we are required to safeguard public health and provide a reliable and safe conveyance of wastewater through to a treatment facility, or in our case, to an ownership transfer location to the CBRD. Again, our system is a Class 3 system based on complexity and population served. And a great work that has occurred over the course of 2019 and 2020 and into operations in 2021 was the introduction of the Supervisor Control and Data Acquisition System, or SCADA, which now monitors our wastewater systems 24/7, 365, which has a direct link to our operational staff. And quite simply, the operational requirements by the Minister of Health, in combination with industry best practices and standards, are really simply that maintaining proper operation, maintenance, and monitoring of our wastewater facilities. It sounds very simple, and it is that simple. It's about due diligence and the conveyance of wastewater within our systems to our residents, and then firstly, providing staff the opportunity for education and certification. We are mandated by the province province to have certified operators within our operating our system. And the city does a great job of maintaining those services. And additionally, having contingency plans on hand in the event of a failure of one of those ordinances or systems. Similar to what you saw in the water report or presentation, we've got sewer assets. And again, a very similar story, and overall net increase past 4 years of about 5%. But again, not a direct relation to the overall increase in cost of services. Again, we're just driving to find those efficiencies in service delivery. And with that, we'll move it over to capital projects, and Mr. Davidson is going to speak to the majority of these projects as they fit within the engineering services role.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, as you can see, we have a number of sewer capital projects coming for the upcoming year. First project, sewer Mansfield Drive force main. So this is design and construction to upgrade our Mansfield lift station, which is unfortunately under capacity at the current time. Next project, Greenwood Trunk construction. So this is funding to complete construction of the Greenwood Trunk lift station. We're going to complete next year. Puntledge sanitary catchment replacements, replacing some end-of-life sanitary main and also eliminating a lift station. So this is the detailed design portion of that. Sewer First Street lift station replacement, detailed design for replacement of the First Street lift station, which is located down near Puntledge Park. South Courtney sewer system, so this is options analysis to develop servicing program for South Courtney, an area that was right into the city of Courtney back around 2015. And Braidwood Road, this is the sewer component of the detailed design phase of the Braidwood Road design. With that, I'll hand it back to Edward.
All right, thank you, Chris. So again, the 5-year capital plan is available on page 28 of your agenda if you want to have a peek. And I just want to mention again, we're going to be adjusting the capital carry forward if needed before we finalize the consolidated financial plan. Now we'll be covering the revenue requirements for the sewer fund. So this year, staff recommend a 7.5% increase to the user fees with no change to the frontage fee. The remaining revenue requirement will come again from realized and anticipated growth. The impact for residential home is about $26. Just want to point out again that 48% of the total user fee is going towards the sewer requisition. And similar to what we discussed for the water fund, the sewer master plan and sewer rate reviews will be completed in 2022 and will inform the sewer revenue requirements for the future years. And now an overview of the transfers, contribution, and surpluses for the sewer fund. So the transfer of revenue to fund the capital project increased significantly in 2022. And this is mostly due to the reallocation approved by council for the Greenwood project in 2021. So we redirected some of the funding from general revenue towards for other project towards the Greenwood project in 2021. So now we need money to fund those other projects in 2022. That leads to that increase from 2021. And again, similar to water reserve, the contribution are fairly stable here in the sewer fund, just the reduction from the carbon tax to the greenhouse gas reserve. And this year we anticipate to use surpluses to cover, to balance our budget in the amount of $880,000. And again, that's related of the money we need to fund the capital project. And now the anticipated balances at the end of 2021 and 2022. So as we discussed for water, we again recommend to maintain an equivalent to 2 months of operation in the sewer balance. We're going to be dipping just a little under that for, we anticipate to be just a little under that by the end of 2022. However, we expect surpluses to be generated in future years. So we're going to go back to that level in the future years. And again, we can have the detail of the 5-year plan balances on page 29 of the agenda. And I also want to draw your attention on the asset management reserve that we withdraw significantly in 2022, again, due to the reallocation approved for the remove project. Are we now completed the question?
All right, thanks very much. And that has generated some questions, starting with Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Well, starting with the last thing you mentioned, the surplus. I mean, here's a great example of why it was good to have that surplus, those reserves higher, because we did run into an issue where we had to use a fair amount. And if we hadn't had those funds available, it could have been, this could have been a more dismal picture going forward. I also wanted to bring up something, just always trying to find things that are relatable to our taxpayers. And I like the little chart that had how many manholes and how many force mains and all that kind of stuff. I find that stuff kind of interesting, 6.2 kilometers of sewer force mains. We are the largest municipality in this area, and it means that we have a lot of infrastructure to maintain. And so under the increase for the manholes, if all the folks out there watching didn't notice that we have over 2,000 manholes to maintain and look after. So I think those kinds of things are important to note. And I guess my last point is around the First Street pump station replacement. I think many folks are looking forward to that, obviously for the infrastructure piece, but also for the kind of the amenity that's attached to it down at Hunters Park. And I'm just wondering if it's still in the plan to kind of enhance that, to provide, some amenities for the park. And also just, I know we've had questions about the smell down there, and I just wondered if you could speak to that and how that will be rectified possibly with this project going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the mayor, thank you for the question. Councillor Moore and Chris Davidson will speak to that.
Thank you for the question. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, to answer the last portion of your question, yes, odor control will be a strong component of this upgrade. Very strong. The first part of your question, the way the project's set up right now, it is only set up to address the lift station itself. So we are planning to leave the bathroom as is more or less intact. So we're not planning to rebuild that asset as part of this work.
Okay.
There may be some opportunities for some minor upgrades nearby, depending on how budgets go, but the core of the work is the lift station.
Could I just ask?
Yep, hang on one second.
There was some discussion about that at some point. Would there be a possibility of that coming out of the parks budget then in conjunction with the project so that it could be done at the same time? It is a very well used facility throughout the summer, and I mean that area can be just packed in the hot weather, which we've been seeing a lot more of. So I'm just wondering how we could maybe try to piggyback on this project. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Staff are certainly happy to go back and work and look at options to address that and bring forward some options for council to consider, definitely.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks to staff for their word. I'll echo that. That's basically a change room down there with the, well, I've only been in the men's, but toilet and the sink. And so, maybe renovations in order, make it more functional. And going to the Parks Department might make a ton of sense. So I think it's really worth looking at. Quick question about the small DCC bylaw there. What does that cover? What are those, the $3,500? Where does that come from? Just some random thing that's floating around out there we collect a bit of money from, or? Well, we're happy to take it anyways. Everyone's
Not sure which.
Oh, it's DC bylaw. It's under sewer development cost charges. It's like a $3,500 line item.
Yes, thank you for that question. That is an old bylaw that was established for a particular area. So it actually comes before my time, and those funds are sitting there. And I believe it's for, I don't know the specific area, but there's one particular place that it's associated with that we have to keep separate, and we are not adding to it. It's just
It's just living its life there. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a question about transfer to reserves, and we outlined the 300,000 to the asset management sewer reserve, which obviously needs to be built back up after we drained it there for those unexpected costs. But I'm wondering, are there any transfers to reserves for the sewer reserve itself? Maybe I missed it. It looks like the balance looks to stay the same at 566, 700.
And we're still on slide 31?
Yeah, that's right, slide 31.
I could speak to that actually. So that's a good question. Actually, the $75,000 there is contributed to the machinery and equipment for the sewer fund.
Yeah.
So for instance, a few years ago, we bought a couple of years ago, we bought that new backdrop, and that was funded by the machinery and equipment sewer fund.
That's great. I guess what I'm getting at is, do we have a snapshot of the next 5 years and what we might need to have in those reserves? If we're aiming for 1.3 million or 1.2 million, do we want to start putting more money back or more money into that sewer reserve as well? Or do we think that's a healthy amount?
That is a healthy amount based on the 5-year plan that we have in front of us. But if you look at the capital plan, we actually have some in those future years. I don't know if we particularly do here, but we have some fairly low amounts because we're still refining those master plans and what those projects are. So I think in order to justify a certain amount to be putting away, it's really good to have that transparent, full scope picture of the 5 to 10 years to be able to identify exactly what that amount should be. To start putting away. So we've been building our reserves based on this shorter term vision that we have, and as we get that longer term plan, we'll be able to identify the amounts that should be put away. But at this point, the amounts we are putting in have been sufficient to fund this plan that we have in front of us.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for that.
So thanks, Councillor Frisch. And just a reminder, if you're speaking to a slide, just mention which slide number it is, and then that way we'll all be following along. And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the report on the sewer budget for 2022. Not a lot of surprises here. I mean, we had a pretty good discussion a couple of weeks ago about the change in user fees just based on the unexpected additional costs of the Greenwood trunk construction. And then looking at this budget leading up to today, and looking ahead at just the impact on our reserves and our future projects, and then looking back on the Greenwood trunk project, and we did borrowing for that a couple of years ago, based on the information that we had at the time, which turned out to be our borrowing on that project was a significantly smaller percentage of the total project cost as it's landed now. And I'm taking a very long time to say my question here, but what my question is given that we've had to use our reserves in order to address this additional cost, have we considered looking at these future capital expenditures? Like I'm even looking at 2022, which I realize these projects may not be the best suited for additional borrowing, but whether or not there's consideration of doing a higher percentage of borrowing on some of our future capital projects just to limit, or I should say reduce our future increases in user fees. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor McCollum. Ms. Nelson?
Sure, I'll try to answer the question. So when we're anticipating to borrow to fund a capital project, which I'm looking at this capital plan, we don't actually have anything that we're planning to borrow for until 2023. So there's nothing in 2022 at this point, but one of the things we have to do in order to get approved for borrowing that is we have to send all of the engineering estimates and capital plans to the inspector of municipalities at the province in order to approve it. And so we have to have that basis supporting the amount, and we can't just borrow more than that. We have to. So the suggestion there is to really ensure there's adequate contingency built into those capital estimates. So that maybe I could pass on to our Director of Engineering to maybe touch a little bit on contingency estimates.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Nelson. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, yes. Great comment, excellent feedback. Based on our understanding at the time for the Greenwood Trunk project, we were carrying what we felt were adequate contingencies. Unfortunately, we encountered unknown circumstances, so as you pointed out, definitely not enough to cover the costs. Going forward, we have taken a closer look at the contingencies we carry for construction, and we will ensure that we do have reasonable, adequate coverage to ensure projects are completed within their available budget.
Thanks, Chris. That's all I have.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor McCollum. Next, we have Councillor Theos.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very kindly for the report on sewer. The amount that we're looking at an increase, does concern me in many areas. We do know some of the reasons why this is coming forward, but it doesn't lessen the impact on the citizens, especially on the small businesses and people that are challenged right now. But my question, with the water, for instance, we factored in the growth that we've had in the community, and with the density growth that we've had, I just don't see that line here. You might have mentioned it, how that's reducing the impact of the increase, but I just don't see how the growth is factored in with the 7% plus increase, 7.5% increase. And secondly, I was wondering in regards to with the water and the sewer, can the budget surplus or the reserves be integrated within the two? Can one lend to the other? Is that a possibility?
Go ahead.
I can answer to those. Those are good questions. First, to do with the revenue increase needed to balance our sewer fund. So I've got the details here. So basically, we're looking to an additional $490,000 in revenue. It's nowhere in the slide here, but and of that, $153,000 is coming from growth, basically, compared to 2021 budget. And then the rate increase will provide an additional $300,000 in revenue. And there's also a little adjustment for the pre-COVID, because our 2021 budget revenue were a little lower because we were anticipating a reduction in revenue from sewer from businesses, and we kind of done that back to regular level for 2022. And then when it comes to the transferring money from one fund to another, we don't do that. Typically, water is just to fund water reserves and surpluses, are just to fund water operations and capital projects, and same for sewer. There is no transfer from one to another, and same with the general fund. It's on its own, and there's no transfer to those funds. And maybe, I don't know if that's been seen ever in the past. Maybe
Sure, it's not just a practice, it's actually legislated that we can't transfer between the funds like that. So we can't just take money from water to help offset a cost in sewer. They are specific funds and reserves that have to be used. The reserves within that fund have to be utilized for that particular function, yeah, the water or sewer. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I was thinking that, but I just couldn't recall because sometimes regional and city have a little differences there. Thank you so much, ladies. We really appreciate the answers.
Yeah, and I think with the COVID, what might have added to the confusion, I think there was a thing when the province was trying to help municipalities, the city, we could actually borrow against it, against those reserves, but that we'd have to pay them back. So, but yeah, it's they are very specific to what they were reserved for to spend them on. So,
Thanks, Mayor.
right.
Yeah, I would recall that.
All right, and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering if Mr. Shaw can refresh my memory on what SCADA stands for.
Thank you, SCADA, so Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition.
Right. So when this was originally implemented, along with other asset management approaches, part of the selling feature was that it would actually save us money, I believe, by enabling us to do preventative medicine, effectively identifying problems before they became more significant and enabling us to fix them at an earlier stage. And one of my hopes was that we would be able to illustrate to the community how we were actually saving by some of these features. And so, for example, we're coming in right now with a 7.5% increase, but if we weren't doing some of these other measures, perhaps we would be looking at more significant expenditures. And I think it actually makes a difference if we have some way of articulating that to the community. So my question is, do we have any data on what sort of expenditures we've saved the city having to make by the preventative measures and other asset management practices that we've implemented?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, preventative maintenance plays a huge role in our overall functionality of our system, and the SCADA system certainly attributes to the portions of that success. And what you're speaking of is KPIs, or key performance indicators, relative to the overall operation of the system and the efficiency thereof. And I spoke to that point a little bit earlier through my slide presentation, whereby you're not seeing a significant increase in the requirement of funding to the overall operation of the existing system. And so SCADA is still fairly new. The KPIs are in development. The direct output right now is funding or money expensed relative to the sewer utility. Preventative maintenance programs inherently cost less than reactionary, and the reactionary are on the decrease relative to our ability now to respond proactively to issues at hand. So we're not seeing, to that end, in closing, we're really not seeing KPIs as they're still building the data or trending in that direction, but you're seeing a direct correlation relative to the expense within the overall utility.
Okay, I'm wondering if there's some way we can articulate that to the community as we publicize these increases, whether it's with the tax notices or otherwise, because I think it's important for our citizens to know that despite the fact that costs go up, measures are being taken to control the amount to which they go up. I do think it's something that is worth some time and energy, particularly given that it was one of the selling features in implementing these strategies in the first place. Beyond that, I'm actually surprised that Councillor Moran didn't bring this up. I'm just wondering, and my tongue is somewhat in my cheek, if the Public Works and Engineering departments have considered perhaps some more inclusive language for the term manhole.
You go over there.
Funny, as soon as I saw it in the report there, when I worked at Shaw like 20 odd years ago, we actually changed it to maintenance holes. So you could still, because they were abbreviated as MHs in some of the treaties. But maybe going forward, we call maintenance holes instead of manholes.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, an oversight on staff's part. Utility access chamber.
Thanks so much.
That's got a real ring to it.
Sounds more technical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you could put engineering in there somewhere as well, that would be helpful. Yeah, thanks very much for that. And on page 26, SCADA is actually defined there. I did underline that as a good thing. I like my acronyms sort of spelled out for me in my limited brain power. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I was going to say, if you're willing to dispense with receipt, can I move the recommendation?
We didn't actually have receipt, so I dispensed with it by not even asking for it.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So, yes, do we need to do it in order? No, we can just let it go.
Yeah.
Move the recommendation. So I'll move that based on the December 3rd, 2021 staff report, 2022 to 2026 sewer fund financial plan, Council approve option 1 and proceed with the proposed 2022 to 2026 sewer fund financial plan, and that sewer user fees be increased by 7.5% for 2022.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and so obviously we've been having an ongoing conversation, but if you got any more questions or comments, please bring them forward and we'll move on to Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor Hillian brought up an interesting point, I thought, around having some info in the tax notices, and I just wondered, I mean, to be honest, I don't look too much other than the bill I have to pay, but I'm just wondering if across the board, not just with any increases that we have, if there can be some kind of information included in those tax notices that gives a bit of an explanation for these increases, the rationale, and I think people would be more likely to pick up on that in their tax notice than even if you do a press release or something. So I was just curious if that was something that we could look at from a communication perspective. Thanks.
Thank you through the mayor to Councilor Moran. I really appreciate the question. During our strategic planning process, it was very clear from council that we wanted to do as best we can in extending those explanations, and definitely we'll be looking at that. We're in the utility portion, and remembering we still have more financial planning, but I appreciate you raising that and putting it out there early in the process. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was just sort of a general comment, not necessarily specifically around this motion, I guess. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Councillor Moran, and I don't see any further questions or comments at this point, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. All right, next on our agenda is the solid waste recycling and yard waste user fee report, and I'm not going to ask for a receipt. We'll just pass it right on to staff. So thank you, Mr. Garbutt.
Thanks very much, Mayor and Council. This utility rate comes hot off on the heels of our discussion around future service, et cetera, and there were some questions from Council on future rates. So again, we'll use the same format as previous. So Ms. Berard and Mr. Shaw will be speaking to this. Thank you very much.
All right, so now going over the 2022 solid waste, recyclables, and yard waste collection budget highlights. So this, the solid waste, again, similar to water and sewer, is self-funded and not assisted with funding from general taxation. This 2022-2026 solid waste budget is based on current service levels. Although it includes the diversion of the yard waste in Q4 2022 and organic waste starting in Q3 2023. Any changes to existing service level approved by council will be included in the 2023 financial plan. So here's just the overview of the solid waste budget. So over.
Oh, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your screen. Click the little green arrow. Yep, that's the one. And you'll have to click that extra button so that it is full screen out on the interwebs.
Oh, so it's not?
Nope.
Oh, right.
And there's a little ticky box. We'll change it for next time. So it always does this.
Yeah.
All right, over to you, Annie.
Okay, so just briefly here, so solid waste contract accounts for over half of the solid waste expenses. And CDRD tipping fee represents 40% of the total budget for solid waste. And on the right side, our changes are just under $500,000. And again, mostly related to the CPI and contractual increases. And now I'll pass it along to Ka to go over the main variances for this budget.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Bernard. I think the one thing that stands out here, first and foremost, in front of council for consideration is the additional person for the solid waste service. So currently within Public Works, that is shared amongst the majority of individuals. There's no one dedicated individual or resource that works singularly with the solid waste service. And so this is a presentation of a 2-year term position, and it's specifically highlighted for the addition of the organics and the implementation of an automated system over the course of the next few years, which will be quite extensively required by the Public Works Group, and will demand a lot of hours of dedication to the successful implementation and communication thereof. Following that is the legal service and support for the RFP process as a whole. We've put forth a $60,000, which is on the high end of the estimates that we've received from the legal groups, but you will recognize in the most recent council meeting that there will be a proportional share of value across the other municipal jurisdictions, so it's likely not to see the full expenditure of that amount. And then a marginal increase in educational brochures, and that coincides with the support that we'll be receiving with our communications folks as we embark on the education and outreach relative to the new service or the implementation thereof. And finally, as Ms. Berard spoke to, contractual increases and then tipping fees associated with such, the CBRD, and an increase of a new variable rate tipping fee in Q4 of 2022 for the yard waste that will now be going to the regional facility. And finally, the additional contract, the CBI increases.
All right. So now for the solid waste revenue, staff recommend a 5% increase for residential and multi-residential curbside service. So that represents for a single family about an increase of $9. And then for the residential, multi-residential units, that represent about $8. The yard waste, extra yard waste pickup will increase by about $1. And now for the ICI, the institutional, commercial, and industrial, and multi-residential apartment and condos, non-curbside service, staff proposed an increase of 15% to help offset that deficit identified in the cost of service review presented last Friday. And for the DCBIE members, staff recommend a 5% increase on flat levy, which would represent a $17 increase. And that would be to provide some relief from the ongoing pandemic and the work that's been done around the Big Street Bridge project. And that last slide is just to show you the combined utility rates for the water, sewer, and solid waste for a single family. So we're looking here at the combined increase of about $45 per household. And again, just want to point out that of the total $1,085 per family, about 33% of that goes towards CBRD expenses. And that concludes the solid waste presentation.
Excellent, thanks very much for that. And I see your finger, Councillor McCollum. There we go.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report. I just had a question. I actually asked a similar question when we looked at the solid waste budget on Thursday at the CBRD board. just around the assumptions that go into projecting our volumes for what lands at the scale zone in terms of our tipping fees versus projected increases to the cost per ton. Another thing I wanted to point out is that at the preliminary budget discussion, it was proposed a no increase to the cost per ton for 2022 too. So I imagine that when we look at the budget, when it comes back, that there'll be some type of revision to that projected expense, or would that be a significant impact to what we're looking at?
So I can speak to this. Really good question. So for the volume, we look at previous year's actuals, the actual tonnage that's been brought to the Comox facility, and then we increase. I think typically it's a 2% increase every year. Although 2022 was pretty much lower than previous years due to the pandemic, so we can exclude that one from our average projection. And then when it comes to your second question,
just that the assumption in this budget is 145 a ton, but it's going to be 140.
Yeah, so we have a $145 this one here, and if if it's significantly lower, we could maybe consider rolling that kind of surplus to next year. If needed. And I think Ms. Nelson wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out there are quite a bit of assumptions in this year's financial plan. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns in terms of where we're going to land once the RFP comes forward and we just make decisions on the level of service that you want to see for it, and which could impact the latter part of 2022. So, council made the decision to pull ICI out of the service later in the year, anticipating, I think it was the end of October, but there could be some time lags with that, and there could be some impacts associated. And in addition, we also have our contract with Emterra that expires at the end of October. And so there's going to be some work done to, what impact will that have in terms of that service payment made to the contractor? We just don't know what that is. So we've had to build some assumptions in. So leaving that bit of cushion in the service at the 145 per ton, I would advise to keep that at this point, because there's some unknowns that are going to be coming down the pipe at the end of the year. And then any savings found within that service would 100%, we could roll that into all the work that's going to happen into the future, 2023 and beyond, and setting those user fees for the residents. So we wouldn't absorb that into general operations. We would keep that. And just noting that this specific service of all the utilities is the one that we really budget with very little surplus. So we're often within even $10,000 or less. So and there's a lot of other administrative work around the city that we don't always fully capture in that cost. So it's not like we have a significant surplus sitting there for us to work with. So I would advise that we keep that cushion. That's just the comment I'd like to make. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful context and seems very rational way to proceed, especially given all the changes that we're looking at in the next 18 months in the service. And just a final comment that this particular utility fee is significantly different than anything else that we deliver at the city, and that basically 90% of what we're passing on to our residents are basically beyond the city's direct control, that there's really just a small margin that we're administering within our organization. So I don't think that there's a lot to tease apart here. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Councillor McCollum, for that. And I might throw in a subsequent as well, because we're talking about tipping fees, but one of the challenges in sort of hidden costs of solid waste is those tipping fees, which are very public, but then there's the tax requisition to make sure that that service is actually financially viable at the regional district. And so I believe it's around 6 million or so, 5 million now. Yeah. So even if the cost goes up at the regional district, but the tipping fees don't necessarily reflect that, are we still on the hook, I guess, to put in towards that tax requisition? Sure.
Through the mayor to Ms. Nelson.
Yeah, so the requisition that's set at the regional district doesn't flow through it like into this utility fee. It actually goes directly on the tax notice as a separate line item that we collect from the taxpayer and then just remit directly to the CVRD. So we don't, at this table, have any control in terms of the user fee. So if costs are rising at the landfill and they're needing to adjust the requisition, that would happen through that requisition amount and not affect our user fee here.
Right. Okay. But as was commented before, that single taxpayer kind of thing, they're just basically, it's a potential other way for them to get charged. Yeah,
through the mayor to council, I would say this is something that we'd like to make sure that our representation watches there, because it's the co-joined service under the old regional district. It's also something that's it's quite a complicated matter to manage solid waste in the two regions. Other regions have actually seen some really direct impacts, both significantly on revenue related specifically to tipping fees. So sometimes, you do price controls, et cetera, to address waste management, but in another southern jurisdiction, they had a very significant implication by tipping fees, and it basically drained the revenue out of the service for, it was quite dramatic. So it's really a really important service to watch, and it is quite complicated. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and I totally acknowledge if the fees go too high, not only can people go to another jurisdiction, but they can also start illegally dumping as well, which I think both those things happen quite significantly. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Would you entertain a motion?
Sure.
I'll move that council endorse the proposed increase to the 2022 solid waste, recyclables, and yard waste user fee for single residential and multi-residential curbside service by 5%, and institutional, commercial, and industrial, and multi-residential apartment and condo non-curbside service by 15%, as detailed in the attachment 2.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to ask staff if they would perhaps reiterate the 15% increase and the difference for the DCBIA. I just want to make sure that that's clearly on the record as to the rationale for that. If I understand it correctly, industrial, commercial, and institutional users will have a 15% increase, but that will not apply to the DCBIA members. It's in essence to give them some sort of credit for the disruption to their economies of the bridge construction. So what it means is that businesses in other parts of town will in fact pay 15%, and I think sometimes businesses in other parts of town think that perhaps we give undue credit to our downtown business sector, which I'm not arguing with, but I'd just like staff to reiterate that what that rationale is, so it's clearly on the record. Thanks.
Mr. Garvey.
Thank you, Councillor Hillian, for the question, and I'll ask our staff to assist if required. But ultimately, currently, the BIA boundary has a specialized service within the solid waste contract, so they are already treated slightly differently than the other ICI users. It's unique in the historical downtown area, and the service is a bit special. I appreciate that. We reiterate that the BIA through the COVID times has had a significant challenge in addition to the construction works that are happening in and around the bridge. And that's our recommendation at this point. The council's decision to allow for ICI to go outside the service and go to the market to provide their service set in the future will both responds to the BIA's requests that they've been making around service flexibility, as well this financial plan prior to it going to the market does give them a break. And it's a conscious decision at a staff level to make that recommendation. And should council support as recommended, I think it's a strong signal.
Thank you. All right, thanks for the question. The motion's been moved and seconded. I don't see any further questions or comments at this point, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes. Only one thing left on the agenda.
Move adjourned.
Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned. That was unanimous as well.
Are we able